Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Make your way up along the rear of your engine compartment. We're going to have to remove our wiper cowl from this area. To remove the wiper cowl, you'll first have to remove your wiper arms. Before you start removing the wiper arms and wiper blades, it's important to make sure you mark the area on the windshield where they're sitting. You can tell that I used some blue masking tape across the windshield. It comes off nice and easy. With those areas marked, we'll continue on with each one of the wiper arms. To remove those, you're going to find that you have a plastic cap. You can use a small screwdriver or pick to remove those. We'll use a 14mm to remove the mounting nut. Inspect all of your hardware as you continue. Replace it as necessary. To remove the wiper arm from the wiper transmission, you want to go ahead and take hold of the arm, give it a little press. Once you see it break free from this area, you can start lifting it up, but keep in mind it is under spring pressure. You don't want to get caught in any pinch points, and you definitely don't want to cause any damage to the windshield. Same process for the other wiper arm. Keep in mind each of these arms is a little different. When we're installing them, we want to make sure we have them in the proper orientation. Now let's pay attention to that plastic portion of the cowl. Along each side, you're going to find a protective shield. We want to carefully make our way underneath this area and gently separate it. Once you have one side separated, do the same exact thing on the opposite side, and then we'll meet in the middle. To continue removing the plastic portion of this cowl, you're going to find that you have locking clips making their way across the bottom. Ours are missing, so I don't have anything to show you, but typically you just want to pop those right out of place, a quick inspection, and set them aside. Once you've removed those, go ahead and take hold of the plastic portion here. We'll give this a wiggle, lifting it straight up and pulling it forward and away from the windshield. A quick inspection and set that aside. With that out of the way, let's pay attention down in this area. We're going to disconnect a couple of electrical connectors. There's one right here, the locking tab's directly in the center. Go ahead and depress that and then slide the wiring harness apart. A quick inspection on each side for corrosion. If you see any, you want to make sure you take care of that. We'll follow this over. We're heading towards the wiper motor. Once again, we have a locking tab right in the center here. You're going to depress that and then slide this out of place. A quick inspection for corrosion. Now let's start dislodging the wiring harness that makes its way all the way across this area towards the driver's side. We'll do this starting with a trim tool. Make our way right down here. Just make your way underneath this and pry it up gently. Quick inspection. We'll continue following this. Now as you continue, you may find that if you were to look underneath this area, some of these will have locking tabs that you can squeeze together and pull these out of place. If you have a hard time with your fingers, you could use some pliers if necessary. Now it's time to remove the wiper motor and wiper transmission. To do that, you'll find that you have three 10mm headed mounting bolts holding it in place. There's one tucked in up behind here. Now, as we take hold of this to remove it, you're going to have to slide it a little bit towards the driver's side. There is one locating tab in the center here. There we are. We'll be careful pulling this up. We don't want to cause any damage to the windshield. This is the area that I spoke of. We had to slide this out of its mounting point. Let's pause inside of this area and make our way down along the front outer area on the passenger side. You're going to find that you have a metallic bracket here that's held in place with a 10mm mounting nut. Let's remove that nut and the bracket. Slide that out of the way. Let's rest that aside. Now let's make our way inside the wiper cowl area. We're going to remove 4 14mm nuts. There's 2 along each side. These nuts are the nuts that hold the strut to the body of the vehicle, but they also hold this in place. We'll remove all 4 of these, like I said, 2 on each side of the vehicle. That's this side. I'll do the same on the opposite side of the vehicle. Continuing on, you're going to find that you have 5 10mm headed mounting bolts making their way across. There's one right here, and they continue on towards the passenger side. At this point, everything's dismounted. We'll take hold of this, carefully lift it up along each side, making its way over the mounting studs for the front struts. After that, pull it straight out and away. With the wiper cowl out of the way, we'll continue on to removing the plastic engine cover. For this, you just want to carefully lift it up and away from the engine. Before we continue any further, it's important to pay attention along the top of the engine. If you see any miscellaneous debris, you want to use some compressed air, blow it all out of there so nothing can fall inside of the engine while we continue. Now we can start paying attention to the intake. You're going to find several areas that we will have to deattach. We have an electrical harness along the passenger side. It has a locking tab. Squeezing on that, we'll give it a little wiggle and slide it out of place. Continue making your way across. For this, we're going to squeeze on the 2 ears, slide the hose right off of there. A quick inspection to make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged. Set that hose aside. With that hose out of the way, we'll move along to the next hose. For this one, you just go ahead and give it a little twist to separate it. We'll set that aside as well. For this hose, we're simply going to dislodge it from across the top of the air inlet tube. We'll make our way down here. Once again, squeezing the ears, sliding the hose out of place. Now down just under that area, you're going to find 2 more hoses, but be careful with these hoses. These are coolant hoses that lead to the throttle body. Of course, we will be removing these from the throttle body, but before we do, let's make our way over to the radiator. In the front of the engine compartment's where you're going to find the radiator cap. We need to make sure there's no pressure in the system. To do that, carefully press down on the radiator cap, turn this counterclockwise, and lift it up, straight, and away from your face. A quick inspection of the seal on the cap there to ensure it's still in good working order. Once you've released the pressure, we can go ahead and put that cap right back on there. Before you start removing the coolant hoses from at the throttle body, it's a good idea to make sure that you pinch off the hoses. We don't want to cause any damage, but we do want to restrict coolant flow from this area. Keep in mind, even though you do pinch off these hoses, coolant could still make its way out of the ports in the throttle body. Have a collection receptacle handy. We have our small hose pliers here. Once again, we are going to be careful not to cause any damage to these hoses. Now we can start removing the hoses from the throttle body. Each of these does have a clamp that you're going to want to squeeze and slide the hose out of place. If your hose is stuck on there, you could use a small hose pick. We'll repeat the process for the other hose. On our application, it looks as though the hose clamp is facing downward. It's going to be a little bit difficult to gain access to those ears. While we're still in this area, let's pay attention to this hose. We'll just pull it right off of the intake here. Moving along, we'll start removing the air inlet tube from along the air filter housing and the throttle body. To remove this, we're going to loosen each of these two 10mm headed clamps. You only need to loosen them enough that you can remove the tube. We'll take hold of this tube, carefully pull it away from the throttle body. As you pull that away, we'll also start lifting it up. Now that we have that lifted up, we can start pulling it away from the box as well. Just be careful for our hoses as we continue here. Now we can disconnect the throttle body wiring harness. For this, you have a locking tab facing towards the rear of the vehicle. We'll squeeze that in, disconnect this. Now you're going to find that the wiring harness makes its way down along the bottom of the throttle body, and it's held in place with a bracket. To remove this, we're going to remove this 10mm headed bolt, which holds the bracket to the throttle body, but it also holds the throttle body to the intake. Start making our way along the back side of the intake now. You're going to find that you have a vacuum hose that leads from the intake all the way over to the brake booster. For this, we'll go ahead and squeeze on the clamp that holds the hose to the intake, and we'll slide the hose out of place. Make our way back here with some angled pliers. Quick inspection of that. Set it aside. Now we can start removing the mounting hardware that holds the intake to the engine. Most of it's out in the open across the front. There is one piece of mounting hardware along the backside here, holding the intake to a bracket. I have my mirror in place. You have a clear view. We'll be removing this by using a 12mm. If you were to feel right down along the backside of the intake here, that's where you're going to find it. Now on the passenger side here, we can see that other mounting bolt along the back side of the intake. We can remove that as well. Now we can continue to the forward mounting hardware. In this area, you're going to find that you have two 10mm headed mounting nuts, one on each side of the intake, and you have four 5mm Allen head mounting bolts in the center area. We'll start with the outboard mounting nuts. When removing the mounting nut on this, it removed the stud as well. That's okay. We'll just go ahead and set that aside. Let's get over on the other side. There's that stud as well. Now we'll use our 5mm Allen head for the next 4 mounting bolts. Let's take hold of this, set it aside. Now that we have that out of the way, the next thing we need to do is block each one of these ports leading into the engine. Once again, we don't want anything to fall inside. I'm just going to use some folded up rags and gently press them in, just enough that it'll protect each one of the ports. Now the next thing we're going to do is clean up the top area along this intake. That way there, when we go to install the upper intake plenum on here with the brand new gaskets, we'll make sure we have a good seal. Make sure we're scraping away from the ports. Use some parts cleaner directly on a rag. Wipe down the areas, give them a thorough inspection, make sure there's no raised areas and no miscellaneous debris. Now we can get these rags out of here. Be careful when doing so. Sometimes there's debris that fell into this. Make sure you remove all 6 of these. You cannot leave any of them in, otherwise you're going to have a serious engine issue. One last quick wipe and inspection. Now let's have a look along the bottom of our air intake plenum. This is where you're going to find your gaskets. There's 3 of them. You always want to go ahead and remove each of these, give them a close inspection. It's never a good idea to reuse them. Generally they will be stiff. Go ahead and replace them with brand new ones. Just try to wipe this down. As always, we're making sure nothing falls inside of any of the ports. Got a new set of gaskets. Align them and press them in. It's important to make sure each one of these is completely seated. If it's off by a little bit, you're going to have a vacuum leak. Now I'm just going to double check each of these. It only makes sense. Continuing on, if when removing the mounting hardware, holding your upper plenum in place, you had removed the studs at the same time, we're going to install those now. Go ahead and start them in by hand and snug them up using an E6 Torx socket. Now once you have that bottomed out, we're only going to take it a little bit further here. We don't want to cause any damage, but you do want to make sure it's snug. Same for the other stud. Right there's bottomed out. Now we can get that air intake plenum in place. We'll carefully bring this over, making sure we do not cause any damage to our gaskets. Slide it over each of those 2 studs and down into the proper position. Once you have it in position, we'll continue on with the 2 mounting nuts and all 4 of the mounting bolts. The bolts go across the center. Our other nut on the far side here. These just go right on those studs. Now we're not going to tighten any of these until we have each of them started in. Now that we have everything started, we can continue on with snugging it up. After that, we're going to torque each thing. When we're snugging it and torquing, we're going to do it in a very specific sequence. We'll start with the center mounting bolts. I'm just going to bottom these out. Now we'll snug each of those 2 nuts, starting with the passenger side. Now that we have the hardware bottomed out, it's time to torque it. The torque for the bolts is 13 foot-pounds. We'll be starting there. Once we get to the nuts, that's 12 foot-pounds. Now it's time for those mounting nuts. Like I said, 12 foot-pounds. At this point, we're going to go around a second time just to ensure that everything's torqued properly. Do it in the same sequence, the same torque spec. Now that we have all the forward hardware in place, we're going to make our way along the back side of that intake plenum. We have our 2 12mm headed mounting bolts, one on each side of this. Okay, this side's nice and tight. Now we can make our way back over to that first bolt and tighten that as well. With all the mounting hardware tightened, we'll continue on with the electrical connector along the passenger side. Press it in, listen for a click. Now we can make our way over towards the driver's side of this. We'll start reconnecting some hoses. Let's make our way over towards the driver's side rear of the intake now. We're going to secure that brake booster hose along the back side. We'll just take this, bring it right down into position. Now on this, it does have a clamp. You want to try to squeeze on that clamp so you can slide it into position. Just squeeze. Once you have it slid on there, go ahead and give it a tug. Make sure it's properly secure. Let's continue on with the bracket that goes along the bottom of the throttle body here. We have our 10mm headed mounting bolt. For this bolt, we're going to start it in, snug it up, and then we'll torque that to 7 foot-pounds. That bracket is for this wiring harness. That's going to connect on the back side of the throttle body there. We'll just press that in, listen for a click, of course. A little tug, make sure that's properly secured. Now it's time for our 2 coolant hoses. Make sure you put those back into their original positions. Just slide them right on there. Take hold of those clamps with some pliers. Get these off of here. Now it's time for our inlet tube. Before you tighten either of the clamps, you need to make sure you're completely bottomed out. You don't want to have this sitting off kilter where dirty or unmetered air might make its way into the engine.
going to slide this tube onto the air inlet tube. Squeeze that clamp. Let's get the center tube on there. Little tug, make sure it's secure. Got our next tube. This one goes from that valve cover all the way up to the intake. Now we have that small hose that goes right along the front of the intake there. Let's press it on, give it a little tug. Now we can get this in place. We'll be paying attention along each side. You need to put this up and over the strut towers and over the studs for the struts along each side. There's one side. Press that down on there. Continue on to starting on each of the 4 mounting nuts for the front struts, but we are not going to tighten those yet. Next, we'll continue on with our 4 short 10mm headed mounting bolts. Starting from the passenger side. Let's tighten those 10mm bolts. Next, it's time for all 4 of our strut nuts. We're going to make sure that we snug both of the nuts on each side of the vehicle and torque those to 66 foot-pounds with the full weight of the vehicle on the ground. With all those mounting nuts tight, we're going to continue on with the wiring harness across the front here. You want to make sure you secure it into all of its mounting points. We'll start over by the master cylinder, pressing it down into the locked position as we continue over. For this one, we'll go ahead and plug in this electrical harness at the same time. Press it in, listen for a click. We'll give it a little tug to make sure it's properly secured in place. Looks like that wire's coming out. I'm just going to press it in, make sure that's secured as well. We'll lock this into position right along the center. Now it's time for the wiper transmission and wiper motor. When installing this, we're going to pay attention along the forward aspect of the motor itself. There's a rubber grommet. That rubber grommet will fit into this slot inside the wiper cowl area. We'll bring this into position, aligning each of our 3 mounting bolt holes. There's our grommet. Slide that towards the passenger side to lock it in. This one over here, top corner. Once you have them all started in, go ahead and snug them up. Let's tighten these down. Let's reconnect the wiper motor. Let's make our way back towards the passenger side now. We're going to secure this bracket. It slides down into this area. This locating tab will press up against that other stud, start on the 10mm nut, and snug it up. One last quick inspection in this area, and we can continue on with the plastic wiper cowl across the top. Before we install this, I'm going to show you up along the top area that goes near the windshield. You're going to find that you have an area for the windshield to slide in between, making its way all the way across. We'll carefully get this in place while also aligning it with each one of the areas on our wiper transmission. We'll be careful around that windshield. With that pressed in position up against the windshield, you want to carefully press it down and install all of your locking tabs, making their way across. As I mentioned before, ours are missing. I have nothing to show you, but essentially just press them in there and make sure this is properly secured. Make our way along each corner area. We're going to press these into the proper position. There's one. Next, it's going to be time for each of your wiper arms. When you had removed them, I had mentioned that each of them will look different and you want to pay attention to where they go. The passenger side wiper arm will have a larger bend. We'll take this and put it in position, aligning it with the wiper transmission towards the center area here. While pressing this down, we also need to pay attention to our markings that we had made on the windshield, ensuring that the wiper blade is matched up with them. We don't want to have it down like this, and we especially don't want to have it above. If you have these in the wrong placement, you're going to have a wiper issue and potentially cause damage to your vehicle. Once that's in position, we'll continue on with our mounting nuts. Go ahead and start them on and snug them up. Double check to make sure that one's secured. We'll install the plastic protective cover. Repeat the process for your driver's side wiper arm. Make sure we're level there. Protective cover. Let's reinstall the engine cover. Just get this aligned with its mounting position here. Press it in, make sure it's properly secured to your engine. The next thing you're going to want to do is make sure you check and top off your coolant. It's probable that when you had disconnected those coolant hoses, even though you pinched them off, a little bit of coolant came out. That's going to cause an area where there's a small air bubble in the system, and we want to make sure that you top off the coolant with the manufacturer coolant. To do that, carefully press down on the radiator cap, turn that counterclockwise, remove it. Quick inspection, and then top it off right through this port here. After that, you can continue on with reinstalling the cap by pressing it down and turning it clockwise. Okay, friend, we've got our vehicle back together. At this point, you want to go ahead and start up the vehicle. Let it run for a little while, make sure you have no check engine light, no running condition, close the hood, and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.